let's say a homeowner has a house, a guest house, a garage, and 3 acres of land. What can I expect a general physical inspector to inspect out of that entire property?
Well, per the CREA standards of practice and ASHI, the inspection is designed to inspect the primary living area and its primary parking area. Now, the guest house, of course, would be considered a primary living area as well. The inspector can't be, it would be unreasonable to think that the inspector is going to walk the entire, what'd you say, 9 acres?
3 acres.
3 acres?
Uh-huh.
Even 3 acres. Yeah, because the actual grounds, other than what is closely adjacent to the actual structures, are not part of the inspection. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, property walls, fences, and gates, they're actually outside the scope of a property inspection.
Okay.
But obviously you want an inspector to observe and report. So if they do see something wrong with those things that are outside the scope, you would still, when choosing an inspector, want to make sure that they are offering that information as well. That's a great question. Does ADU fall into the same category? It's a structure, so it falls into the same category. If it's there, an inspector doesn't care if something is permitted or not permitted, right? Because they don't really know. Unless there's blatant signs that this thing's probably not permitted by the city, they don't know if this converted garage or this little, tiny house that was built next to this other house being used by, a guest or the mother-in-law or whatever. They have no idea if it's legitimate to be there. They're still going to inspect it in those 3 criteria: safety, functionability, at the end of its service life.
When you say outside of their scope, what does that mean and why? No.
This is a copy of the CREA standards. This basically is the inspector's hat. Okay, this outlines what their job is, what they are to inspect and what they are not to inspect. When I say outside the scope, that would be in this section here, Part 3, limitations, exceptions, and exclusions. So there's many things that are excluded from a home inspection report or home inspection, and property walls, fences, and gates is one of those exclusions. But when I further say that in choosing an inspector, you truly want to find someone who's basically their first job, okay, or their importance, what they put their importance on, is to observe and report. So if there is something that's outside their scope, here's a great example: an oil well. What if there was an oil well in the backyard? I guarantee you there's not a property inspector outside of Texas who probably knows what an oil well is or really how it works or whatnot. But minimally they would say there appears to be an oil well in the backyard. You should have it further evaluated by that appropriate specialist, because it's outside my scope. That's the communication that you minimally would want to hear from an inspector. Same as property walls, fences, and gates. You got a wall that's leaning over. Maybe it's a retaining wall. Maybe it's just an aesthetic wall. The inspector could literally walk by it and just not have to say anything, and that's legit. But that's not what we want. We want somebody to say, hey, this is outside my scope. I don't know if it's structural. I don't know if it can be repaired, but I would suggest that you bring in a wall expert to further evaluate for you, because that is tangible information that the client can then do something with. That's what we're selling. We're actually selling information that the client can actually do something with, that gives them the ability to make an informed decision about that property, that house.
Oil well seems so specific. Mm-hmm. And then fence is it's a fence. I mean, it's not, do you need a fence pro?
The CREA standards of practice were written along the same time as the California Civil Codes were written, when the laws and the standards for home inspection were being formulated back in the mid to later 90s, early 2000s. And then, of course, there's continued changes and updates and upgrades to all of them. Really, the reason is is, again, going back to what Thora and I were discussing just a few minutes ago. The purpose of this inspection is to focus on the structures. It's not to focus on the property, okay, in the true sense of the word. The acreage, the outer areas. It is the structures. It is the habitable areas, okay? As a matter of fact, curious enough, you know what else is outside the scope of a CREA standard?
What?
A swimming pool. A swimming pool. It's outside the scope. It's considered a ancillary, if you will, item. It's outside the scope. But that doesn't mean the inspector won't inspect it if they elect to inspect it. Anything that's outside the scope of the CREA standards, the CREA standards also allows, right, for the inspector to inspect that thing if they choose to. So the inspector can choose to inspect property walls, fences, and gates, choose to inspect pools and spas. We inspect, my company, LaRocca Inspections, inspects pools and spas because we choose to. Property walls, fences, and gates, we don't, because they're not something typically that is going to fall into the category of something that could be a significant defect. A leaning fence, as you even sort of pointed out, like, what is a fence? Typically is not going to fall into that category of a significant defect. Leaning fence, go get it fixed. It's a few $100, a few $1,000, whatever. We're not talking about a pool that's cracked on the bottom, leaking its water into the ground soil. We're not talking about a foundation of a house that over time has sank at the back corner because of improper drainage. These are significant defects, okay, that the inspection is designed to find and call out.
What are there's new rules or regulations about spa stuff, or?
You're referring to SB 442, Senate Bill 442.
Is that, I feel like, because I've heard you talk about that in a couple of classes with specific people.
Right.
Yeah, what is that?
It was signed into law October of 2017, I believe, and actually implemented January of 2018. And basically what it is, it's Senate Bill 442 that is a new law that was signed, and it requires the home inspector to, it actually changed the definition of what is a home inspection. Civil Code 7195 had the definition of what is a home inspection and what is a home inspection report. And SB 442, when it passed, it actually added verbiage to the definition of a home inspection in its report to include a safety inspection of the pool and or spa, right? And that safety inspection would include listing or speaking to 7 different listed items that were listed, if you will, or codes from the California Health and Safety Code Administration and ASTM, the American Society for Testing and Materials. So now the home inspector actually has to, it's mandatory. If you have a pool and or a spa or a combination of those two, the home inspector is required now to actually go through and do an inspection of those items, looking at it from a safety viewpoint. So that's mandatory.
Specifically California?
Yes.
Okay.
But that doesn't include what the elected inspection would be of a mechanical or a systems inspection of the pool and spa. In other words, a mechanical inspection would be, we fire up the heater, we see if the pumps are working, we see if the electrical is correct, so forth and so on. So this is in addition to, or by itself if the client doesn't want the pool inspected. It's a little tricky. The curious thing about this law is that, from what I understand and from the way the law is written, is that nothing needs to be done. This is informational only. So in other words, the buyer, let's say there were 3 things that weren't in place, or let's say there was nothing in place. The buyer can request of the seller to do anything, but the seller is under no obligation to bring the pool and or spa safety systems up to any standard. So it's informational only for the buyer to then decide what they wish to do with after they purchase. If they're concerned that there's no fence around the pool, of course, they have 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds running around, they're going to put a fence around the pool. But it is informational.
Does your company, do your inspectors carry insurance?
Does my company, do Do my inspectors carry insurance?
Yeah.
Yes. Every one of our inspectors carries errors and omissions and general liability insurance. It was curiously enough, we've always carried errors and omissions insurance. I discovered 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was, the residential purchase agreement, the CAR document, California Association of Realtors, the residential RPA, and joint escrow instructions. I did that for you.
Thank you.
I discovered that in there, there's a line in there that actually requires the buyer to provide insurance for anyone coming onto the property that would be working for the buyer. And when I discovered that, I went, whoa, okay, I don't think there's any buyer that's doing that. So we immediately went and attached general liability to our insurance policy so that we could comply, basically, and offer that as part of our service.
What will my report look like?
Well, your report basically comes to you electronically. It's a PDF document. We can print it and literally send it as a hard copy. It's sort of like a magazine or a book, if you will. It's written in a narrative fashion. It's very easy to read, left to right, top to bottom. Lots of pictures that show, like, the condition of things and so forth and so on. And everything that we inspect is categorized. It's categorized into a serviceable, needs attention, or not acceptable condition. Serviceable indicating that the item is functioning as intended. It's exhibiting normal wear and tear. Needs attention, it's the inspector's opinion that the item needs further evaluation and or repairs by an appropriate specialist. And then not acceptable is the item is either not functioning or it's a safety hazard. And so as you're looking through the report, you can quickly determine the categories for every not acceptable, and most certainly you want to look at those carefully and call out the plumber or the electrician or whoever would be the appropriate specialist to give you an idea of what it would take to remedy that condition. Depending on the size of the property, the inspection report can be 22 pages up to 70-something pages, sometimes over 100 on very, very large apartment buildings or very large properties like that. But each page is full of information, again, narrative and pictures, that help the client really understand, not determine, the condition of the property.
Okay.
The inspector's determining. And between the inspector and the client communicating together and the inspector going over the report with the client, okay, the inspector is helping the client to understand the condition of the property. That way the client is more informed and they can make a more informed decision whether they want to move forward or whatever they want to do with the property.
If there are, dozens of pages of things that may need attention, how am I supposed to decide what to ask for?
It's a great question. Not to put too much traffic on my lines, but I have requested of agents to have their clients contact me. Have their clients sitting down on the phone with their report, either on their computer or in front of them in a printed out fashion. I can go through the report with them, or the inspector can as well. And the inspector and or myself can help the client to highlight those more important areas. And when I say more important, I think it's very important that the client understands that they want to, if they're going to be requesting repairs or credits, they want to focus on those things that are truly fall into that category of a significant defect, of something that is of such scope that it's important for both sides to look at and determine, I should repair this. If a seller has a hole in the roof, that hole in the roof belongs to a seller.
Right.
The seller, if they're going to continue to live there, would want to repair that roof. If they're going to want to get top dollar for their house, they're going to want to repair that roof, right? So then therefore their think would be, okay, well then yeah, I can give some credits back to my buyer to repair the roof themselves after I've moved out. You see, that common ground and staying focused on the significant defects oftentimes can lead to a smoother transaction and a smoother coming to terms and coming to an agreement on the actual sale of the house. Credits are typically something that the selling side would give to a buyer upon request of items to be repaired. In my opinion, I would prefer the money taken off of the price of the house, or out of escrow, write me a check, for, let's say there's $5,000 worth of things that the buyer is requesting, as opposed to the seller fixing those things. I would rather have the credits. That way the seller can walk away, will never get a phone call, hey, your guy did it wrong, right? Because when you get the credits, then you're choosing whoever you trust, your contractor, your people, to fix that thing. All right? That's what a credit is. It's basically a concession. Yes.
Okay.
It's money.
Okay.
If you want the simple answer, Mark, just tell me you want the simple answer.
No, but it's funny that they call it, like, is that just purposely euphemistic? Like, they don't want to say...
Well, credits can come in different forms. I mean, credit could be lowering the price of the house, $5,000. Credit could be we will write you a check, a personal check. Credit could be coming out of escrow. So credit is actually a pretty good terminology for that thing, because it's not always exactly in a cash money form.
Let's say I got the report and I'm like the type who wants to hang around, and I sit down with the inspector and whatever. Would it also be cool if I was like, what does this mean? And then we go up and look at it together?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we literally go look and, like, I don't know, like, I don't understand what something means, and then we go up and we look and, like, has it ever gotten argumentative in terms of, like, well, that's just a crack, that's just a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then he's like, I just have to report that.
Keep in mind that anything the inspector reports on is the inspector's opinion. Okay, that's very important. The laws provide for that. The CREA standards, all the standards provide for the fact that these are opinions of the inspector. Obviously, the opinions are formed based on their knowledge and experience. So if they see a crack in a wall that they feel is cosmetic in nature and can be patched and painted, that's going to be their opinion. If the buyer is concerned about it and they are of the opinion that it is more significant, or why is my house cracking, then of course the inspector would recommend further evaluation to help the buyer determine if these cracks are significant by getting a structural engineer or somebody like that could basically give them more data, more in-depth information as to that thing, so that, again, they can make a better decision. As far as following the inspector around or asking them to show me this or show me that, there's no reason why a client, whether it be a buyer or a seller, whoever the inspector is working for, should ever feel guilty, about asking for that type of service. There's no reason why they should. They should absolutely have that type of service. Now, many inspectors may not like it. Many inspectors may not want it to occur. I understand that. They have a job to do. They're working in time windows and so forth and so on. But they also have a service to provide for their client. And if that is, if that's what their client needs, then the inspector really has to assume the appropriate level of service. I've often told many agents to give me a call and give me some information about their client that they're working with. Are they a professional? Do they like things just A to B, fast and smooth? Or are they a brand new buyer? Are they a little bit nervous, a little bit more standoffish? I will help them choose an inspector based on the attributes, characteristics, mannerisms of their client. Because I've got really soft-spoken guys who are calm and gentle, and then I've got guys who just, A to B, get it done, get it in there. So depending on what type of client you have, I can help the transaction go more smoothly, or the inspection process anyway, by sort of, personalizing an inspector for you.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You did that.
I do it all the time.
Like, they take a photo of everything, most everything? Because then sometimes that's not necessarily an opinion. That's kind of then indisputable if you're like, there it is. We took a photo or a video of it, or whatever.
Well, yeah, an opinion can be undisputable too. I mean, an opinion can be a fact.
Fair.
It's only those things that others would have a different opinion of that outline what opinion is. Okay. In other words, if I were to take 2 electrical wires and touch them and shock myself, okay, it's my opinion that hurts, and I don't like that. And I will, as quickly as I can, let go of that. But I have seen electricians use that to go, okay, yeah, that's 110.
Oh my God.
So they've gotten, I don't know, used to it. It doesn't affect them as much. It's their opinion that it doesn't bother them. But it's an undisputable fact that we're both getting shocked.
Got it. Okay. Cool.
That's the best analogy I could come up with. And the amount of pictures in the report are very dependent upon what the inspector is really trying to communicate with those pictures. If it's a large house and there's a lot of things going on, then yes, there's going to be more pictures in the report. I have policy that requires a minimum, a certain amount of pictures in every report. And then, of course, it goes up from there, dependent on the size of the structure or even sometimes the condition of the structure. A picture is worth 1,000 words. If you want to truly show a hole in the roof, to show the magnitude, if you will, of that problem, then a picture would show that pretty much for everybody. A hole in the roof, spoken, everybody knows, okay, hole in the roof, that's not good. When you show them a picture of the hole in the roof, they go, oh, wow, that's a big hole.
Right.
Okay, so then now everybody can formulate their own opinion of importances for them on fixing that hole in the roof or negotiating that hole in the roof. Now, the other thing real quickly with pictures, my insurance company requires me to have a certain amount of pictures of every property. So there are many more pictures that I have that aren't in those reports. So that we can go to the picture file if there's a change of condition after the inspection and determine if it was that way during the inspection.
Cool.
For the, if there's ever an insurance claim or even a question about that. Was that stain on the ceiling during the inspection? Yeah, it was, or no, it wasn't. Yeah, we can look and find out.
When can I expect my report?
Never. Never. I don't like your attitude.
Oh my God.
Your report typically, well, again, that speaking to my company, okay, obviously every inspector out there probably has their own policies. I have a policy that reports are delivered on an average size home within 24 hours of the inspection. Sometimes that's 24 to 48, somewhere in there. Ultimately, the best way to determine when you can expect your report is to ask your inspector. Oftentimes things happen. The inspector gets really busy, he's already backlogged, it's a holiday, whatever may happen. But my policy is 24 to 48 hours on an average size home.
Will they be repaired by your company when the inspection's over if I wanted that?
No, you can't expect that because my company performs no services like that. We do none of my inspection companies do any repairs, alterations, upgrades. We inspect only. This affords us to be basically non-bias in our findings. If you were to have your home inspected by someone who did the repairs, okay, number one, it's illegal. There are actually laws protecting against that the inspector cannot perform repairs on that home for a certain amount of time after the inspection, because there could potentially be bias to make something sound or be a bit worse than it actually is, or in need of repair when it's actually not. It's just one of those things that allows us to maintain an integrity level towards the inspection, and that's what we focus on as opposed to being contractors or trying to sell something.
Am I going to know how much it's going to cost to repair the items that are called out in the inspection report?
The specialist is the one that should provide you costs. If you're trying to determine cost estimates for repairing roofs or repairing foundation, then it's really those specialists, the foundation expert, the roofing expert, that you should obtain costs from. My general inspectors have a vague idea because they're sort of in the industry, but they are not mandated in any way to stay apprised of costs associated with any sort of repairs or construction. They are required to stay apprised of industry and standard building codes and trades and things like that, so that they know how to inspect those things. But costs associated with that, I wouldn't want them to, and I don't think the client, we would be doing a client a disservice by trying to calculate or estimate a cost, because we're not that expert. We likely would be giving them misinformation. And if they were to try to operate on those numbers, unfortunately, it likely would not turn out well. We would be either overshooting to try to find a comfort level for us, or we would estimate it so low that if they were to get credits for that number, they'd find themselves stuck. And then, of course, again, asking the inspector why they weren't more accurate. Now, my specialty inspectors, those guys are specialists. The sewer line, the chimney guys, they are specialists. They do stay apprised of costs in the field. But that's the difference between a generalist and a specialist. or one of the differences.
My agent said that I didn't have to attend the inspection, but I'm a little bit nervous about that. I don't have a lot of time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Looking for a house took up most of my vacation and personal days.
Right.
So how do I then squeeze in the inspection time as well?
Well, I always recommend that the buyer and or the seller attend their inspections. They're going to have questions. Then sellers are going to have answers. They're going to contribute, as they should, per many of the escrow documents, per the California Association of Realtors documents, such as the CAR Statewide Buyer Sellers Advisory. They have a contribution. They have a hat to wear. They have a job to do. Per the law, they're actually obligated to do their own diligent visual inspection. Now, when you take inspection day as likely being the day that is going to provide the most time allotted for people to be at that property, because the inspection is going to take 2 or 3 hours usually, and that most certainly is a significant more amount of time than your first, you discovered the house and you got the showing of the house or your walkthrough. Spend this time to walk through the home and discover those things for yourself. Spend this time asking questions of the inspector, getting involved, doing your own visual inspection. Get involved with it. That's what I would suggest. I understand that sometimes you can't make the inspection, but it's, in a nutshell, honestly, I think it's a detriment. You're purchasing something that is likely going to be the biggest investment you've ever made. You wouldn't buy a car without test driving it. I think there's very few people that just send somebody off to, hey, go pick me out a car. Go handle everything for me on that car. Test drive it for me and tell me how you liked it. It doesn't quite work that way, So I always recommend that the buyer or the seller be at their own inspections.
Is it okay to bug the inspector to, go up in the attic or, look at the electrical panel and ask questions? Because I'm nervous about, my father-in-law had a whole situation with the electrical in the house that he purchased, and he's warned me about that, but I know nothing about it.
In those cases, I will tell you this. Ultimately, if I understand your question correctly, if you already have a concern about a particular component or system of the house, like you've had a bad experience in the past, your father-in-law with electrical, maybe you're concerned about mold, maybe you've had bad roof issues in the past, termites, rodent activity, whatever. If you've already got those things going on, then it would behoove the client to minimally ask the home inspector and tell the home inspector that these are your major concerns. The home inspector will help then steer and guide you, the client, into a way that you can obtain the information that you desire so that you can feel at ease about that thing. For instance, we're still doing a general inspection of the electrical, but a general inspection of the electrical is going to give enough information to the home inspector to determine if the system is safe or unsafe. If we determine the system is unsafe, then we're going to be recommending the electrician. And that would serve in your uncle's case, your father-in-law?
Yes.
Father-in-law. In your father-in-law's case, that would have served to ensure that he got the information to determine if the electrical system was safe by referring to the expert. Just because the inspector is a generalist, it doesn't mean that they're going to get a minimal amount of information. They're going to get a lot of information that then the client, buyer or seller, can operate off of to bring them peace of mind for that thing.
If I'm buying the house, should I read the inspection report from cover to cover?
The one that was generated for you?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
My agent,
Simple questions, Laura.
Okay. I know, right? All right, so.
But I want to expound on the answer.
Okay.
There's important information on every page. Let's just pretend, boilerplate material is designed so the inspector doesn't have to type the same thing over and over and over again. It's really for ease of communicating an important topic. But just because it's boilerplate doesn't make it less important than anything that was generated specifically for that item or that inspection. Because the boilerplate material often tell you what the guidelines are, what the parameters are, what your duty is as a client with this information that we're giving you is. So there's important information in every line of the report. If the report is not used as a whole, the report then doesn't really do you a good enough service, because it is used as a whole. It does add up to all of the information about that property to help you with the transaction.
My agent said that the gas isn't on at the property, but I've already scheduled the inspection. What do I do?
The seller is obligated to have all of the utilities on and obligated to make the property available for inspection on inspection day. So that's the one of the seller's duties, is to ensure that the gas, water, electricity is on, that all keys are available to unlock doors, that all pets are secured, that all areas that would require to be accessible are actually accessible. Attic accesses, garages, open the garage door and it's full of stored personal items, we can't inspect the garage. But more specifically to the gas is not on. Unfortunately, when we have a system or a service that is off, we can't inspect many different things that that utility is needed for. For instance, gas. If you have a gas-fired heater, we can't tell you if you have heat in the home. Having heat in the home is a code. You have to have heat in the home. In a habitable area, it has to have heat. We can't tell you if you have hot water. We can't tell you something as simple as hot on the left side as you turn on the faucet and cold is on the right. Because as we turn on both, we get water. One's not hot, one's, they're both cold or room temperature. So there's many different things that we can't inform you of. Then, of course, we would have to come back at a later date when the gas is on to finish the inspection. That's going to add additional fees. Now, the interesting thing is the seller is required to have the utilities on, but the buyer is required to pay for the inspections. So right there, you've caused conflict. Right there, there's a conflict, because buyer says, hey, Mr. Seller, you didn't have it on, so I want you to pay my inspector the additional $300, whatever it is, to come back out and finish the inspection. And buyer says, no, I'm not doing that. It says right here in our RPA that you're responsible for paying for inspection fees. So you've got this conflict. So I would suggest, as best as you can, that if you know prior to the inspection occurring that a utility is not on, to get with the listing side and have them please get the utility on so that I can do the inspection. The utility companies do offer a service that will turn the utility on for, I think it's 72 hours or something like that, for cases just like this. So it's a free service, and it's very simple. It's one phone call. They come out and turn it on for inspection day.
Is a home inspection required when I buy a home?
Not required, no. A damn good idea, yes. It's interesting too. In the RPA, the property is being sold as is. In most properties that under normal contract and so forth and so on, are being sold as is. But the next line right after that, which people sometimes seem to forget, is it's contingent upon the inspections. So you kind of have the inspection to know what as is. Otherwise, you don't really know what as is. But it's definitely not required. It's not a law. It's not a law. But a general physical property inspection is more common than not. I would say 95% probably of the real estate transactions have a physical inspection, or at least some sort of inspection, even if it's your buddy who's the general contractor who's just sort of walking through giving you some idea of the condition of the property. But no, not required, but would not forego it. It's so valuable. For the minimal amount of money, we figured it out once. On the average property, 0.125%, I think it is, of the cost of the property is what you're spending on a inspection report.
1/1000.
1/1000th, thank you.
Okay.
1/1000th of the cost of the property is your average expenses on an inspection report. Why wouldn't you do that? For the value that that inspection report could have. You're buying an $800,000, $1 million, $1.5 million home. The value, let's say that home inspection cost you $800. Potentially the value of that inspection could be tens of thousands of dollars. On an average, it's probably around $3,000. It's a pretty good return for my dollar. Absolutely.
Are home inspections and appraisals the same thing?
No, they're not even close. A home inspection provides information as to the serviceability of the home, the livability of the home, the condition of the home. An appraisal basically is a number that they feel the home or the structure is valued at in comparison to other homes and structures in the neighborhood. Completely different. One has to do with value, one has to do with functionability.
Can my home fail a home inspection?
No, it's not a pass or fail. It's not your high school exam. A home inspection is basically just what is. What is the condition? It's either this or that. It's not a pass or fail.
What if the home inspection does not find any material defects?
Good, excellent. Why not? Right? You'd be happy about that. It's peace of mind. Again, I was talking about the value of a home inspection. The value is not always in a monetary, form. It's not always the dollar amount, but it's also peace of mind. It's comfort knowing that that perfect home that you just found, where you're going to raise your family, has nothing wrong. Wouldn't you love to move into that and just have that confidence and that comfortable feeling? We picked the right home. Isn't that lovely? So for $600, you're moving forward with that feeling of confidence, comfort, and security. Why not?
Why would I want to get a pre-listing inspection before selling my house?
Pre-listing inspections do many different things that are beneficial, believe it or not, to both sides of the transaction, not just to the selling side. One, you can truly determine the best cost of the house, pricing the actual house to move quickly through an escrow, by really knowing what's going on in your home. Many sellers don't know of potential problems that they have in their home. So now they've just been surprised by having a pre-listing inspection to find something out. But now they won't be surprised when the buyer has their inspection and they find out. They already knew. That's a great disclosure. You already come into that when an offer is being made, you've priced the house accordingly based on what was found in your inspection. You are already offering your buyer a disclosure package of a home inspection report, and in my opinion, I've seen it. I've seen that build rapport and trust among the two. I've been in this industry for nearly 20 years, and no transaction goes smoother than one that has mutual trust on both sides. This isn't a football game where each side is just trying to beat the other side up to win and score and end up being the big winner in the end. They're actually, both sides are trying to obtain the same goal. One's trying to sell, one's trying to buy. It's the same goal. It's the transfer of property. It's the same exact goal. So that listing inspection can leaps and bounds help that move forward. You can focus negotiations on those things that are already known about. You're not surprised about them. You can decide to fix them or not. So now you have disclosure. One of the car documents, I forget what the name of it. Do you remember the name?
Seller's advisory?
It's the seller's advisory, I believe it is, right? That actually recommends that you should do what you can to market the home. It is about marketability. Imagine if your buyer comes in and decides, I don't want to buy the house because of these things that they find. Well, that hot new listing, it goes cold. Potentially can go cold. If there's not a backup offer or nobody's waiting in the wings, So it goes cold on the market. So now the seller is faced with, well, what do? Do I just take it off the market and forget about selling? Do I fix all of these things that were discovered? Or do I just not fix the things and still live in the house? It gets... Marketing is everything when you're selling a house. A pre-listing inspection can go a long way to actually market the house.
Do you need to take that?
I don't even know who it is. I think it's spam.
What about the question of, there have been a few agents who have said, pre-listing inspections. You know, if a seller finds out that there's something wrong, that means they have to disclose, so they should have to then set aside money to repair everything. It becomes this whole complicated affair. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not really what I say to that. There are accredited agencies, and in this interview I won't necessarily name them, but there are legal representatives and accredited agencies who follow sort of the legal wave of real estate. The number one reason, according to them, and clients can do their own research, but the number one reason for lawsuits in the real estate industry is failing to disclose. I know a lot of agents who want to disclose everything, who are completely on board, completely transparent, and that's the way they truly feel the deal goes better. I'm of that camp. I am truly of that camp. If it's here, if it's known about, it can be dealt with. It never has the ability to come up and bite you in the end. It's known about, it's been disclosed. Let's work it out. Let's continue to move the transaction forward in spite of it. Let's work this out. Whereas on the other end, the idea of, oh no, we don't want to disclose, we want to hold everything close to the vest and whatnot and just like leave it alone, that's a wild card. You're flipping a coin at that point. I've heard stories from some major players in the legal arena for real estate of accidental failing to disclose by agents. Like they had a piece of information that they thought wasn't important and they didn't disclose it and they got sued and they lost. In my opinion, and from many professionals that I work with, being upfront, being transparent, and disclosing those things is absolutely the only way to go. There is the argument on the other end that having a pre-listing inspection is only good if the seller is going to fix everything. I say that's sort of a silly viewpoint. The seller can disclose they're not fixing everything, and the house has been priced accordingly, but it's still disclosed. Transparency, disclosure, putting it out in the open, it's the only way to go. It's the safest way to go. It's the safest way to be. And I enjoy working with agents who are of that mindset. In my opinion, there are a lot of agents still who are not. I've been in meetings where half the room was, half the room wasn't, and it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch. And there's good arguments on both sides. Right. There really, really is. But it's ultimately, in my mind, my experience, my viewpoint, everybody comes out on the winning end on the disclosure side, where the potential to come out on a losing end on the non-disclosure side is always there. There are cities and there are states who have adopted the idea of pre-listing inspections across the board. San Francisco is one of them, who literally are just like, yeah, absolutely, pre-listing inspections. So I think it's a good idea. Long-winded answer, but I think it's a topic that deserves a lot of consideration.
The jeopardy that sellers face in the inspection contingency period, having to further negotiate, agents are also at the mercy of additional negotiations. They've already negotiated the sale price. There's an accepted offer. Now we've got two people contending as to the value of certain things that need to be repaired, and sellers don't often think that, well, I've lived there for how many years and it's never been a problem for me.
Exactly. That's the idea of managing your seller's expectations. By having a pre-listing inspection, most certainly pricing the house accordingly, and then of course managing the guy who's raised his family there, who has seen his grandchildren grow up, in this house. They've never experienced anything wrong with their fireplace. They have fires in their fireplace every Christmas. and it's lovely. The buyer comes in and has a fireplace inspection, and the fireplace inspector basically says it's unsafe, whether it be structurally or fire safety. The seller who's lived there and has used it argues, well, no, it's safe. I use it all the time. In a case like this, an example like this, chimney fires are much like earthquakes. They're just sudden events. No one can really predict them or when they're coming or when they're going to happen. And they usually happen at the most inconvenient time. No matter what time it is, it's always inconvenient to have a big earthquake or a chimney fire or a house fire. But that's what it is. It is a sudden event. So helping to manage the seller's expectations by those pre-listing inspections so that they have that information straight off the bat. Again, as you're pointing out in your example, it doesn't allow for that surprise, that interjection of a new negotiation now inside an escrow that's already open and already running smoothly.
I was given a previous inspection report. Why should I spend my own money to have another general inspection performed?
Okay. The information in that previous inspection report does not belong to you, the client. It belongs to the one who paid for that report or hired that inspector or is under contract with that inspector. So therefore the information would be for you would be informational only. You would not be able to do anything with that information, especially if something were to occur after the inspection. You are not covered by the inspector's insurance policies. You are not under contract with that inspector. The inspection report does not belong to you. So for those reasons, and there's another one, having your own inspector come in and offering more information that could either agree with or disagree with. Okay, again, it's just more information to then be more informed to carry out a better informed decision.
Let's say that I want to save the money and I don't want to get another report done. But it's been 60 days. So I'm just wondering, within 60 days, I mean, could something likely have happened?
60 days, a lot can happen within 60 days. There are companies, and myself included, who I can do what's called a review inspection. I'm not positive of do you know what the parameters are? Was it 60 or is it 30? It's 30. Yeah, within 30 days we can come out and I don't want to say gloss over, but we can go over that previous inspection report and double check conditions to see if they're the same, if they've changed, and so forth and so on. That's called a review inspection. It's at a discounted price, but what it does is it does put you under contract with us, and it does make a report that we generate now in your name. So that's what that would be. At 60 days, there's so many things that can happen. I mean, the law basically states, pertaining to home inspection, that it is only at the time of the inspection. Whatever condition we find is only good for the time that it was inspected.
Right.
It can change in a day. It's like that sudden event sort of thing, right? We can have good pressure at a faucet this day. The city can come in and shut down the main water line in the street to do repairs, and then all of a sudden crud comes up into your pipe and it clogs up the aerator at the end of the faucet. 2 days later you have no water pressure. So there's a condition that literally can happen within hours that then could reflect a different condition as reported on.
Right.
So then you got 60 days. Yeah, lots can happen in 60 days. We recently had a significant earthquake out in the Ridgecrest area, 2 of them, as a matter of fact. That altered every single chimney inspection that we've done prior to that earthquake, because it shook down here. My pots and pans hanging from my ceiling were banging. My house was moving. My windows were rattling. So that basically means that every chimney that we've inspected that we said is fine, it may not be fine anymore. It just takes little ground movement like that to even create, to begin to create a crack in a chimney or cause structural issues in a chimney.
Do you walk on the roof during an inspection for a general physical inspection?
The inspector, following his standards, essentially is required to go into those areas or to go on those areas that they can get to and reach without causing damage to the property or potentially putting himself or others at risk. So the short answer is yes, we walk on the roof, providing the roof is safely accessible and the roof itself won't become damaged from us walking on it, or the inspector won't harm himself or herself by getting on it. A great example of that is, let's say we have a home that's a two-story house with a pretty steep pitch tile roof and it's raining. We're not walking on that roof. It's unsafe.
Right.
It's unsafe. But we will get the client as much information as we can by inspecting it from other areas. Even if it wasn't raining, we typically aren't going to walk on a tile roof that's that steep. The steepness makes it a bit unsafe, plus the tile, we have to be very careful not to break the tile. But we're going to be inspecting that roof on a ladder from its edge, from second-story windows, using binoculars from the ground, so forth and so on, so that we can get as much information as possible.
Do you inspect under the house through the crawl space?
Yes. Again, there is a required minimum amount of space of 18 inches in a crawl space so that an inspector can safely navigate through the crawl space to keep him or herself safe and to obviously not cause damage to components, pipes, and electrical items underneath the house. So the short answer is yes, as long as it's accessible safely.
Inspecting the pool, is that an additional fee?
Yes. Because again, the pool would be considered an ancillary item, if you will. It is an additional fee to the home inspection fee.
Do you inspect the fireplace and chimney?
The physical inspector, what they do, I wouldn't really call it an inspection of it. They do a just slightly more than a cursory glance. They'll look at it with their flashlight, they'll look at it from this viewpoint. If you've ever looked up a chimney from a fireplace, even with a flashlight, you'll see that you really can't see much. Because the way they're designed, there's a smoke shelf, so it's not just a straight shot, Plus, at that angle, looking straight up, how do you see a crack or a break that needs to be being looked at on a horizontal line as opposed to a vertical? So the inspector just sort of does a few things and does a very minimalistic, if you will, inspection, mostly for safety, mostly for functionability. But the National Fire Protection Agency, the NFPA, requires that a level 2 inspection, and that's done with a video camera by a professional chimney inspector, they require a level 2 inspection to be done anytime a home transfers ownership. A lot of people don't know that. I teach a lot of risk management type of classes, and this is one of the things that I refer to all the time. I try not to make up an answer or to come up with an answer. I have a lot of answers based on my experience, my knowledge, my observation of things. But really, when I'm answering questions like this, I try to find who is the accredited agency or accredited body, the expert in that industry or that field that actually has the answer, and that's what I would share with you as far as the chimney inspection. The NFPA says you're supposed to have a chimney inspector inspect it.
Do you inspect solar panels?
What's a solar panel?
Oh goodness.
No, again, this is a specialty item. We would make note that they exist. We most certainly would try to determine the roof's condition where the solar panels are attached. Oftentimes solar panels are, screwed right into the roof, and the penetration of those brackets and the hardware used to hold the solar panels can cause damage to the roof. So we're going to be very aware of what's occurring there. But ourselves, that is a specialty system. We would make note that it is in place. We would ask for seller's disclosures of the system, and then of course recommend further evaluation or determination of its condition by that appropriate specialist. So the short answer is no, the long answer was that.
Is water pressure checked? This is a question that comes up a lot.
That's a great question, because water pressure has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't. It really doesn't. It's volume. You want to make sure that when you're in the shower that when you flush a toilet or someone else uses a sink, you don't get scalded or you don't get frozen to death because of the fluctuation of volume. It's not pressure. I can have 10 psi of pressure or 80 psi of pressure and have the problem on both ends. Doesn't matter. So ultimately, we try to check the pressure as best as we can because there's a safety pressure. In other words, anything over 80 psi, pounds per square inch, going into a house is considered unsafe because many of the things that, like faucets and the faucet connectors, they're only rated for a certain amount of pressure. So we try as best as we can. If we can get a pressure read with our gauge, yes, but it's not for the reason why most people think. What we're mostly concerned with, and what the buyer most certainly should be concerned with, is volume. Do we have enough water still being sprayed on our body at an appropriate temperature when a toilet is flushed or a sink is turned on?
Right.
This, honestly, is one, I'm glad you touched on this, because this is one of those points that I recommend every buyer to ask the seller for disclosure on. Is everyone comfortable taking showers while, dishes are being done, or laundry is being started, or a toilet is flushed? Are there any conditions occurring? That third-story bathroom, is there enough water volume and or pressure up there at the sink, when we're running the bathroom downstairs? And these things are oftentimes only disclosure from the family moving out is going to reveal. An inspector can't really test a third-story sink faucet while a tub is running downstairs.
Right.
It's just a little difficult to test it in those parameters. That just leads me to something else that you haven't asked me about, but a little more information. The inspection also is not done. It can't duplicate living conditions. So, disclosure of living conditions. Be a curious buyer. Be very curious about water pressures, water temperatures. How long does it take to get hot water to here, and so forth and so on. The inspector can't determine that. The inspector may go to that third-story bathroom sink and turn on the hot faucet and see that he's got hot water within 4 seconds. The inspector does not know that faucet has been being used all morning.
Oh.
But if it was left overnight, it would take a minute and a half. Doesn't know that. The seller knows that. So again, there's those things, the living conditions, how those things perform under actual living conditions can differ from the inspection parameters and how things are tested and assessed in an inspection.
Let's say the seller has never lived in the property and doesn't know, honestly. So, but I'm a buyer and my showers are important to me. Like, I've got long flowing hair.
Bring your bath towel.
Should I then ask for a plumber to come out and test these things, or tell me, or how
That's a great,
can I address that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because obviously we can take this thing, it's just too far, right? There's a couple ways to really address that. One, you have to understand that a home inspection or any inspection is not in lieu of foreclosure. It doesn't take the place of, it doesn't take the place of disclosure. It's not in lieu of foreclosure. It doesn't take the place of disclosure. Obviously, if you're buying a house that then there would be less disclosures than normally available, because it's a bank-owned property, it's probate, it's whatever, it's vacant, there's no seller to speak of. Maybe the owner actually passed away, but the son or the daughter is taking care of the transaction. They've never lived there. So you have to understand that the inspection itself is not a substitute for disclosure. That in itself right there would then lead me anyway, and I would suggest to a buyer, to lead them to being a little more diligent in discovering those things. Now, there's a couple ways they could be more diligent in your example. There's 3 ways. 1, you could actually bring your bath towel. You could take a shower, determine it for yourself. 2, you could make the inspector aware of your concerns and considerations, and please have the inspector address that specific thing. I'm a shower person. I need a lot of hot water. I got a lot of hair. I need good pressure, so forth and so on. I stand in there for 20 minutes. Have the inspector, as best as they can, mimic, if you will, those parameters that you're trying to address. If they have the time, okay, again, as we were discussing earlier, they should try to provide the level of service that you're requesting if it's reasonable. Why not? And then the other one is to do your own diligent inspection. Go turn on the shower. See, is that enough water pressure for you? Temperature of water and water pressure is often a personal preference, right? In my house, I take a shower and I've got this rain dome shower head and it's full blast and I'm like getting holes drilled in my skin. I love it. My wife is like, no, that's too much. It's too much. She likes really hot showers. I don't. So it's a personal preference. So the inspector's opinion of how the shower works, again, it's based on his preference or her preference.
That's really good to know.
Yeah. So the ultimate answer is, in cases like that, the buyer's diligence, their curiosity level, and their communication really has to step up, has to come up. The questions they ask, the things that they actually go investigate for themselves, the information that they need to get onto the lines, if you will, the actual get the attention of that appropriate personnel to address those things for them, it definitely has to come up. It's if you're buying anything like that, a flipped house, a house where you're concerned about permits, a vacant house, a house where there's no disclosures, so forth and so on.
That's a really tough situation, actually, because you can't rely on disclosures at all.
That's right.
And you can't rely on your agent. Your agent isn't going to know any
That's
more
right.
than you are.
That's right. The agent is only obligated to do their own diligent visual inspection. They're not obligated to test items or crawl in attics or crawl underneath the house. So again, the parameters of the laws and the CAR documents, California Association of Realtors documents, allow for the buyer to do their diligence. You have the right to investigate. We live in a buyer beware state. Okay, even though the home is sold as is, contingent upon inspections, keep in mind inspections is not just the guy who you hired to do an inspection. An inspection is any inspection, yours, your brother's, your mother-in-law's, whatever. All of that information can be utilized in the transaction. A friend of yours could be walking through the house during your inspection day and observe a crack in a window pane that no one else saw, that it wasn't disclosed to you. And they could say, hey, there's a crack in that window pane. You could write it down as a note and just hand it to your real estate agent. It now becomes part of the contingency inspection package. That's simple.
Why have a mold inspection? It seems, redundant because you already know that there's going to be mold.
Well, that's like saying, well, you're buying a house in Los Angeles, there's going to be termites. Why do anything about it? Termites are common. They're the most common thing that we have that, to every household. We live in Southern California. There's termites. That doesn't mean nothing should be done about it. There's still termite inspections that occur so that we can address the termites to make them stop eating the house. Mold is very much like a termite. Many molds are actually eating, the house. That's what they're feeding. A mold is a living creature, if you will. It depends on a low light source, moisture, and a food source. A food source for mold a great one is wood, the framing of your house. So the mold is feeding, right? So you live in an area that is susceptible to mold because of the high moisture, right? There's many ways to address indoor molds by using things that keep the air a little bit drier. Dehumidifiers, I forget what they're called, but there's the little packets, those little silicone packets that you get. Right. You hang them in your closet and they actually absorb moisture. You can buy them at Amazon, online all day long, and they help to absorb the moisture. Keeping the windows and doors open so the breeze comes through, and it helps everything sort of stay dry as it can. Just because there is moisture in the air doesn't always mean there's mold in the house. Mm-hmm. There's other parameters. There has to be a food source again, and there has to be a continued source of low light and food for them. Mm-hmm. So at the beach, if you notice, when you walk through a house at the beach, their couches aren't usually right up against the wall. They're pulled away from the wall. They actually separate them so that they have air movement So setting up your home properly when you're living in those areas that have, high humidity is also very important, because you don't want to trap that air and moisture into a dark place
Okay.
where molds can then start to grow. So there's a lot of different tips, that your inspector could offer you depending on your circumstances and where you live to help control mold. There's mold everywhere. Mold is occurring naturally in our environment. Mold is nature's recycler, right? Different molds can affect people differently. There's household molds. There's molds that, when left unchecked, can become toxic and damaging molds. So it really is about controlling those things that are inducive to mold. Moisture control is the key to controlling mold. Control moisture. Get the moisture away and out of the house. And that will lower the risk of molds even beginning to occur.
I also was picturing a lot of beach homes with glass and a lot of light, because you want to see the view, but I think that also helps with, okay.
Mold grows in low light conditions. When you've got sun just coming in, the skylights, the big, beautiful glass, it serves two purposes, absolutely. Beautiful view of the ocean and the beach, but yet you've got this natural light coming in that's sort of like, killing any mold that could before it even begins. Absolutely.
A general inspection is going to tell me about the sewer line too, right?
No, a general inspection actually can't tell you about the sewer line. A general inspection may be able to give you some information as to the sewer pipes underneath the house if it's a raised structure, but only from an exterior viewpoint. Are they metal? Are they plastic? Are they rusted? Are they leaking? But inside those pipes and the main sewer line, which actually begins just outside the structure and connects the house or the structure to the sewage disposal system, whether it be private or public, that's underground. And there's no way to determine its condition. You can flush the toilets and run the showers and run the sinks, and just because water is moving away from this fixture is no indication of the condition of that pipe underground. The only way to determine its condition is with a sewer inspection. That's where a special camera is inserted into the main sewer line and then sent through that pipe with its goal being the city connection or the private septic connection to determine it most certainly is connected. And then, of course, determining what its condition is. You could have, for example, a pipe that's broken in half. It's still going to drain. It's going to drain forever. And meanwhile, it's digging this huge hole underground. As water passes through, it's taking dirt and sending it down into the sewer, and it's introducing water, so it's excavating this hole, and that eventually culminates potentially into what we call a sinkhole, a collapse of the earth or the street or whatever. Google search it.
Okay.
You'll see. Yeah, broken sewer lines are not good. They're not fun.
There was a major sinkhole and a major disruption to traffic and living in the Valley and Studio City a couple years back as well.
Yeah. Water pipes break, sewer pipes break, stormwater systems break, and it's like anything. Water erodes. That's what it does. Water passing through dirt takes dirt away from area. The more dirt you remove, the less stable the area becomes. If that dirt is holding a street, a bridge, a house, whatever, eventually, if enough dirt is removed from the area, it can no longer hold whatever that weight is on top of it, and it will collapse. Mm-hmm. It's just like a hillslide. It's like anything. Enough water comes and removes enough dirt to cause movement. That's what happens. It's just physics. It's pretty simple.